Okay, in Module 2, we're going to focus on the infant and then parenting styles. And parenting styles is something that's very handy to know, looking at kind of eventual outcomes and approaches to parenting that parents tend to display. So it goes right up with what we talked about in last chapter, talking about attachments and attachment styles. And then parenting styles kind of goes, I think, really flows nicely with that. So let's go ahead and explore. So one of the things that we know about the relationship with infants with their parents is that mothers tend to spend more time with the children, particularly caregiving, than fathers do, with fathers spending about a third of the time compared to mothers interacting with the child, typically through play and not so much caregiving activities. And I got to tell you, you can see societal bias because just try to look for fathers with infants compared to mother with infants on Google Images. It's not even close. I really had to look a lot to see this little one with their dad kind of bathing them. So even in the pictures that we take in our society, it shows the slant towards mothers in a caring role for their infants. Now, that's not to say, though, that fathers don't play an important role. Of course, mothers do. And, there's a host of benefits, of course, with any attentive parent. But I think sometimes fathers, even in the legal system, get overlooked as far as their caregiving capabilities, and they are quite capable. What you see is that fathers who spend more time with their children, it results in higher levels of warmth and affection that the child is able to receive. You typically see those children become more socially competent. They tend to have higher achievement. They have fewer psychological problems. And so there are a host of type of benefits to fathers being involved in their children's lives. And even the government has made a lot of efforts in trying to emphasize the importance of fathers along with mothers being part of their children's lives and the benefits that we can see. So the concept of a three-person system is pretty much a minimal kind of mode for a family system. You have a mother, a father, and a child. And what we need to know is that each one of those people can have a direct influence on another. So, mothers influence fathers, fathers can influence mothers, mothers influence their child, fathers influence the child. So you have these three arrows. What we also need to know, though, is that there are indirect effects anytime you get more than two people on the overall functioning of the system. So in other words, mothers can influence the father that thereby impacts their interaction with the child. So that reminds me of my kind of favorite story that illustrates this about these kind of indirect effects that come into play. So, going to the grocery store for a child under the age of 5 is really probably next best thing that you're going to do to getting major excitement, since we can't go to theme parks and stuff on a regular basis. So, going grocery shopping with mom or dad is usually a real highlight. You get to sit in the cart, you get to kind of zoom along, you maybe get a treat at the end of the day, you certainly get to maybe help pick out food. Of course, when I grew up, the emphasis wasn't so much on keeping a leash on your children and always around you. You kind of were allowed to roam. And so as we got a little older, my parents would just set us out on missions to go grab something for the cart. And mom was fine. We enjoyed going. But dad was a lot of fun. Dad was the guy you go like, hey, we need to go get milk. Okay, we'll go get milk. Well, he gets the milk, but then the 2 bags of other stuff, usually not on the list, not particularly healthy. And so my brother and I knew this. And so we were thrilled when dad was going, and we volunteered to go in a heartbeat. And we would throw in our sugar choco bombs and all that. And, oh, it's great. We're going to the grocery store with dad. But then one day, as we were, loading up the booty and being able to throw it all in there and like, oh, this is going to be so good. Candy bars. Dad said, guys, I don't think your mother's going to appreciate us getting all this. We're going to need to put it back. And that's when I knew the three-person system and its indirect effects, because mom had gotten to dad, which impacted us. Okay. So that's how this system works. And we see that. And of course, you add more people, it just gets more complex from there. So here are the mother-father-infant relationships, and you can see kind of the amount of change and time for paid work, housework, and childcare. And as you can see, back in the mid-60s, mothers didn't do a lot of paid work, but they did an awful lot of housework and childcare. And now you see, not too long ago, you can see that mothers are now doing more paid work, a little less housework, but even more childcare. And you're certainly seeing fathers do a bit more childcare and housework, but it's still about half the amount is compared to mothers. So there is this kind of change that's been going on societally, but we're still not seeing any sort of near close to equality in regards to the expectations. So let's talk about parenting styles. And first is the idea that we really, there are 4 parenting styles that, according to Diane Baumerind, who's the psychologist who came up with this. And there are 2 major dimensions. The first one is the level of acceptance and responsiveness. So this is the extent to where parents are supportive, they're sensitive to their children's needs, and they're willing to provide affection and praise when the children meet their expectations. Okay, so that's one dimension. Another dimension is demandingness and control. And this is how much control over decisions lie with the parent as opposed to the infant. And so each of the following parenting styles are going to differ on their level of acceptance responsiveness and their level of demandingness. So the very first parenting style is authoritarian parenting, where they have a lot of rules and demands, and they have few explanations, little sensitivity to the child's needs and perspectives. So we would say this has high demandingness control and low acceptance responsiveness, authoritarian parenting. Next, we see authoritative parenting. And be very, very clear, there is a big difference between these two, so don't try to confuse them. I'll tell you why they couldn't have a more specific dividing line of different sounding parenting styles as opposed to authoritarian and authoritative. I'm not sure, but that's what we have. And the authoritative parenting makes reasonable demands. They consistently enforce those demands and rules, but they use sensitivity to and acceptance of the child. And what we'll see here is those children tend to be more well-adjusted, and there's a lot of very good positive developmental outcomes. So they're still high on demandingness control, but they're also high on acceptance responsiveness. Okay. Third parenting style is the permissive parenting. And what you see here is there's few rules and demands, and children are allowed a lot of freedom by indulgent parents. If you think of kind of the spoiled child, this would be under a permissive parenting style, where they have very high acceptance responsiveness, but low demand and control. And the final one is your neglectful parenting. And what you see here is few rules and demands, and parents really are uninvolved and insensitive to their children's needs. This would mean that they are low on both dimensions, low on acceptance, low on demandingness. This has the worst developmental outcomes that are associated with it. Children tend to be more aggressive, throw temper tantrums, tend to be hostile and antisocial, and eventually may lead to drug use. So not good stuff, right? Here is a visual of kind of what I just talked about as far as authoritative, authoritarian, permissive, and neglectful. This would probably be the best way to remember it so that when you have exams and other things that touch on these, you can in your mind be able to organize it. It all has to do with thinking about it on a dimensional basis, and then you can usually fill that in pretty easily. So the outcomes, as I was mentioning earlier, children of authoritative parents, really a lot of good outcomes, well-adjusted, responsible, high achievers. Those who are authoritarian parents tend to be more moody and unhappy, a bit aimless, because once again, they're told what to do pretty much all of the time, and therefore they don't really have the ability to operate on their own. They just aren't used to it, and so they kind of drift in many ways. For those of permissive parents, what you see here is not a lot of self-control, difficulty with being independent, and a low achievement. And that's because they've always been granted what they have been asked for. If you don't develop patience and realize how the real world works, which is you don't get everything you want, and often you have to wait, and sometimes you don't get it, it becomes very hard for you to function okay. And then finally, the children of neglectful and uninvolved parents, as you might imagine, have those high aspects of behavior problems and being antisocial. Now, there is a effect of parenting styles with the type of social class. So lower class, and this doesn't mean to demean by any means, it kind of sounds that way with the title, but really what it is low socioeconomic kind of status, more blue collar type of working class family. And what you see is a movement more towards an authoritarian kind of approach that's going to stress obedience to authority, and being very restrictive. Now, there's a few reasons why this might be. One kind of theory is that these parents, just like any other parents, are trying to prepare their child for how the world is so that they can succeed. And if you're in a blue collar job, you're usually told what to do. And typically, talking back or doing things like that are actually get you fired. And so, to kind of teach them to do as you're told, that is going to be preparing them for the job in a blue collar kind of world. Another reason could be because there is lower SES, there is poverty. Poverty usually, or at least scraping by, means that there's more stress involved in the day to day of just feeding, shelter, paying bills. And so, wanting to have an argument with your child or reasoning is just one thing too many. And so, that's why you don't see as much reasoning, more of a power kind of assertion in this case, and maybe not as much warmth and affection as you might see and more middle class parents, which is very different because they stress this individual initiative because they're in more white collar jobs, which encourages you to discuss things, to work on stuff. You're supposed to ask questions. So that's what parents do, to go ahead encouraging their children. In addition, usually middle class parents don't have the same economic worries, and so they don't have those additional stressors. So they're able to spend more time with their children and maybe be a little more nurturing. Okay. So we can see here a lot of the factors in play. Remember, Brofenbrenner's kind of ecological influences here on the family as a system. So if you have low family income, unstable employment, debts, job loss, that's a lot of economic pressure that can lead to mental health issues, both either the father or the mother or both. Part of the depressed issue is irritability, and so you can have maybe more conflict. It's very hard to be nurturing to your children if you've got an ongoing heated battle with a spouse. And so that can lead to this more maladjustment in the form of adolescent conduct sort of issues. So there's a lot of things going on here, as you can see, with the parenting styles, but it has such a profound influence on children and adolescent development. So really good one to kind of file away here in your knowledge bank. So next, in Module 3, we're going to look at more childhood and relationships with siblings. And if it's any indicator from the classes I've had in person, many of you have siblings, so you'll be able to relate quite well. So stay tuned for Module 3.